Welcome back, everyone, for another deep dive with Black Trauma is Not Black Culture. Today, we're diving into something really relevant: how social factors and politics can actually impact people's health.
Especially for Black Americans.
You got it. What's the big picture here?
Well, it seems like individual health isn't just about what you eat or exercise, you know? There are these bigger forces at play.
Okay, so you're telling me my Netflix binging habit isn't the only thing holding me back? There's more to it.
Way more.
All right, I'm intrigued.
Think of it like this. Health is a game. Some people start off with better gear.
Easier levels, cheat codes.
Exactly. That's kind of what social determinants of health do. They create this uneven playing field right from the start.
Okay, I'm starting to see the bigger picture, but let's break it down. Social determinants of health. What are we talking about here?
Well, the World Health Organization, they define them as the conditions we're born into, grow up in, work in, age in. Everything. Where we live, the opportunities we have, even the power structures around us, and these conditions can create health inequities.
Which are?
Basically, differences in health that are totally avoidable and unfair.
So it's like some people are born on easy mode, while others are stuck on legendary difficulty through no fault of their own.
Exactly. And one of the sources, a study from Current Diabetes Reports in 2022, uses Black Americans as a prime example. It shows how these social determinants can lead to drastically different outcomes, especially when it comes to diabetes.
Diabetes. I always thought that was more about lifestyle choices, like eating too much sugar. How do social factors play into that?
It's way more interconnected than people think.
Like how?
For example, did you know that just by living below the poverty line, your risk of dying from diabetes jumps by 240% compared to someone with a much higher income?
Wait, seriously? Just being poor makes that much of a difference?
It does, and it shows how poverty can lead to things like food deserts.
Where access to fresh food is limited?
Right, leading to higher rates of diabetes. Then, managing it becomes even harder when you're constantly stressed about money and maybe don't have reliable access to health care.
So it's a vicious cycle.
Yeah.
Poverty increases the risk of diabetes, and then having diabetes makes it harder to escape poverty.
Precisely.
Makes sense.
And it's not just poverty. The study also talks about how things like unstable housing can lead to more ER visits and hospitalizations.
Because managing your condition is harder without a stable place to live.
Exactly.
It's like, how are you supposed to keep your insulin refrigerated if you don't even have a fridge?
Exactly. And if you don't have health insurance, you're less likely to get screenings and preventative care.
Meaning problems can go undetected until they become emergencies.
Right.
Wow, so it's like this invisible web of interconnected factors that can trap people in a cycle of poor health, and it's all happening beneath the surface while we're going about our lives oblivious.
You got it.
And we haven't even touched on the impact of where you live, right?
Right. Your neighborhood can play a big role too.
Okay, so how does your neighborhood affect your health?
Well, think about it. If there's limited access to parks and green spaces, where are you going to exercise? And if healthy food options are scarce...
And fast food is everywhere.
Yeah, it becomes that much harder to make healthy choices.
It's almost like your environment is working against you.
Exactly. And then there's the issue of environmental toxins.
Toxins like pollution and stuff.
Yes. Air pollution, lead in water, pesticides, they can have a huge impact on health.
Especially for kids.
Exactly. And the study points out how these environmental burdens are often concentrated in marginalized communities, making those disparities even worse.
It's like we're stacking the deck against certain communities from the start.
That's unfortunately the reality for many Black Americans, and we haven't even talked about education yet.
Oh, right. Education is huge.
Huge EE. Limited educational opportunities lead to fewer job opportunities.
Which means lower incomes.
And the cycle of poverty and poor health continues.
It's like all these social determinants are weaving this intricate web, and it feels impossible to untangle it all.
It is a powerful image.
But it's not just random, right? There are deeper historical forces at play, right?
Absolutely. This web is deeply intertwined with race and the legacy of systemic racism in our country.
So we're not just talking about bad luck or individual choices here. There are deeper historical forces that created these inequalities in the first place.
Exactly. We have a paper here titled Institutionalized Racism and Its Impact on Health Outcomes of African Americans. It really dives deep into how historical policies and practices created this system where Black Americans are disproportionately hit by these social determinants of health.
What kind of policies are we talking about? I've heard of redlining before, but not really sure what it means.
Redlining was this discriminatory practice where banks and other institutions literally drew red lines on maps.
Around neighborhoods.
Yes, around neighborhoods they considered hazardous for investment.
And who lived in those neighborhoods?
You guessed it, Black families. This practice systematically denied them loans and mortgages, trapping them in impoverished neighborhoods with fewer resources.
And those effects are still being felt today, even though that was a long time ago.
The past has a long reach, especially when it comes to systemic issues like racism. And it's not just redlining. Think about occupational segregation, where Black Americans were historically pushed into lower-paying, more dangerous jobs.
So not only were they denied opportunities to build wealth, but they were also stuck in jobs with lower wages and fewer benefits.
Exactly. All these factors contribute to the economic disparities we see today, which, like we've discussed, directly impact health outcomes.
Like a domino effect. One injustice leads to another, and it just keeps going.
A great way to visualize it, and the dominoes keep falling, even in the criminal justice system.
A criminal justice system? What do you mean?
Well, the paper highlights how the overrepresentation of Black individuals in that system contributes to health disparities in so many ways. The stigma of a criminal record can make it harder to find a job, housing, even healthcare.
So even after serving their time, they still face barriers that can impact their health.
Exactly. And then there's the impact on mental health. The stress of constant prejudice and discrimination, the trauma of incarceration, all contribute to higher rates of depression, anxiety.
It's like these systems are designed to punish, but they end up creating lasting consequences that ripple out into every part of people's lives, including their health.
Exactly. And it's crucial to understand that these challenges aren't just about individual experiences. They're deeply rooted in historical injustices that shape the present. It's systemic, requiring a systemic solution.
Okay, so if all of this is rooted in historical injustices, where does the current political landscape fit in?
That's a great question, and it leads us to the next part of our deep dive. How political events and policies can worsen these disparities or create pathways to a more just society. Specifically, we'll be looking at the impact of Donald Trump's presidency on Black Americans' health.
Okay, things are getting interesting now. This is where it could get controversial.
Definitely. But remember, our goal is understanding, not pointing fingers. We'll look at the evidence objectively. You draw your own conclusions.
Sounds good to me. Let's do it.
So we've got this paper, Between Anger and Engagement, Donald Trump and Black America. It dives into this connection between politics and health, especially during Trump's presidency.
Okay.
Like how the political climate, what was being said, the policies coming out, directly impacted the health and well-being of Black Americans.
It's almost like the political climate becomes this extra layer of stress, right? On top of everything else.
Exactly. And the paper argues that a lot of what happened during Trump's presidency was this backlash against the progress made during the Obama years.
So things like advancements in LGBTQ plus rights, immigration, and obviously the first Black president.
Exact.
Huge cultural shifts.
Yeah, and they sparked a lot of resistance from certain groups who felt like things were changing too fast.
Okay, so how did that resistance actually impact people's health?
Well, the paper shows a rise in stress, anxiety, depression among Black Americans during Trump's presidency.
Makes sense if you're constantly hearing messages making you feel unwelcome or unsafe.
Exactly. And then there were those attempts to repeal the Affordable Care Act,
which would have left millions uninsured.
Right, especially Black Americans. That uncertainty, that fear about losing health care, it definitely impacts well-being.
So it's not just about the words, it's about the policy decisions, the real-world consequences.
Exactly. And it's not just physical health either. The paper highlights studies linking Trump rallies to a rise in hate crimes.
Creating this climate of fear.
Exactly, a climate of fear and intimidation.
That's scary. It's like the political climate was emboldening people to act on their prejudices with real-world consequences.
But it's not just anecdotal. The paper even mentions a study that found a big increase in Google searches for Black doctor near me during Trump's presidency.
Wait, seriously? Just searching for a Black doctor is a sign of the times.
It is a pretty interesting indicator. It suggests people felt so vulnerable, so distrustful of the system, that they were actively looking for care from someone who shared their racial identity.
hoping for a sense of safety and understanding.
Exactly. And that brings us to another interesting point. The website excerpt you sent in, remember, the one about healthcare changes after the 2020 election. It talks about how reducing federal focus on health equity initiatives under Trump could actually make things worse.
Right, like those programs were actually helping to address some of the unique health challenges Black Americans face.
Exactly. And the source argues that cutting funding or support for those programs could reverse that progress. It's like taking away the tools that were helping to level the playing field.
2 steps forward, 1 step back.
Exactly. And the source also touched on the potential impact of policies affecting social determinants of health. Housing, education, economic opportunity.
Right, because those are the root causes of these health disparities in the first place.
Exactly. It's not enough to just focus on healthcare access. We have to address the root causes.
Which seems like a huge task. Where do we even begin?
That's where health in all policies comes in.
Okay, I've heard that term, but not sure I totally get it. Can you explain?
Sure. Health in all policies, or high AP, is the idea that every policy decision we make, no matter what sector, impacts people's health.
So not just healthcare, but things like transportation, education, environment.
Exactly. Think about it. If we build more affordable housing in safe neighborhoods with healthy food options, that's going to impact health, even though it's not directly a healthcare policy.
Okay, I'm seeing how this all connects. It's about creating communities that support well-being, not just focusing on hospitals and doctors.
Precisely. And the source also mentions some mitigating factors that could help, but it ultimately emphasized the profound impact of politics on healthcare access, especially for Black Americans.
It's a reminder that elections have consequences. The people we elect shape the health of the nation.
Absolutely. And that brings us to another fascinating piece of this deep dive. Self-care and individual agency. You sent in that thesis on self-care, right?
Oh yeah. This is where I get excited. Self-care as a form of activism is so powerful.
It really is. The thesis, by Brandy Pettijohn, focuses on the work of Queen Afua, a huge advocate for holistic wellness in the Black community.
Awesome.
Yeah, Queen Afua talks about self-care as a pathway to healing and empowerment, especially when facing systemic oppression and historical trauma.
So we're talking about a deeper level of self-care, not just bubble baths and face masks.
Exactly. It's about reclaiming your body, mind, and spirit, and using that strength to challenge the forces that try to diminish you.
It's like saying, I can't control the systems working against me, but I can control how I take care of myself.
Exactly. And Queen Afua's work is especially relevant for Black women. She talks about how the strong Black woman stereotype can actually lead to self-neglect and burnout.
If you're always expected to be strong for everyone else, you might forget your own needs.
Exactly. And Pettijohn argues that this focus on self-care, rooted in culture and tradition, can be a powerful way to combat racism and oppression. It's about connecting to a deeper sense of self, finding strength in community, and using that power to create a better world.
Like building up your own resilience to withstand the storms.
Great analogy. And you know, this self-care as a political act shows up in other sources too. Remember the paper on Trump's impact on Black America?
The one with the Black doctors near me, searches. Could that be seen as self-care too?
Absolutely. People were actively seeking healthcare providers they felt comfortable with, who understood their experiences with racism.
So it's not just finding any doctor, it's about finding one who sees you, understands your needs.
Exactly. And that can be incredibly powerful, especially in a system with so much bias and disparity.
Taking control of your healthcare, advocating for yourself in a system not designed for you.
Exactly. And it's interesting to think about this in the context of social determinants of health. We talked about how those broader forces shape health outcomes, and now we're seeing how individual choices, like seeking culturally competent care or engaging in self-care, can mitigate those impacts.
It's like we can't control everything, but we can make choices to empower ourselves.
And those choices can be acts of resistance, self-love, and hope.
Love that. It's a reminder that even when things feel impossible, there's power in individual choices and actions.
And that power multiplies when we come together, support each other, and work to dismantle those systems creating these inequities.
Which brings us back to the need for a bigger picture approach, beyond just traditional healthcare.
Right. We need to look at the broader context.
And that's where health in all policies comes back in.
Exactly. Several sources emphasize this, arguing that we need to consider health impacts in every policy decision.
So instead of treating illness after it happens, we're creating conditions that prevent it in the first place.
Precisely. The current Diabetes Report study gives some examples. Investing in early childhood education, better working conditions, fair wages, access to affordable housing, and healthy food.
Things that benefit everyone, but especially those most impacted by social determinants of health.
Exactly. And we need to implement these policies with a focus on racial equity, addressing those historical injustices.
Leveling the playing field and repairing the damage.
Right. True equity needs a transformation of those systems causing the inequities.
It's a big task, but these sources show that the health of Black Americans is linked to the health of our nation. Ever feel like you're drowning in to-do lists? Especially if you're a solopreneur, nomadpreneur, juggling a million things at once for your startup. Clients, projects, invoices. It's a lot.
It really is. For small businesses and startups, time equals money, right? Every minute you're not bogged down in admin is a minute you could be growing your business.
And that's where B1 Thrive says their Thrive Cloud comes in. Could Thrive Cloud be like your secret weapon?
Yeah.
Getting all that admin stuff organized, giving you more time to actually focus on your business.
It's definitely worth checking out. It's user-friendly, it's affordable, it works wherever you are. That's a pretty compelling package for solopreneurs, nomadpreneurs, startups, anyone really. And don't forget, they've got that free trial.
Exactly. Go to b1thrive.com, give it a shot, let us know what you think.
Yeah.
You might just find that Thrive Cloud is that missing piece you've been looking for, even if your office is a beach in Bali. We can't have true well-being until everyone has a chance to live a healthy life.
Powerful message, one we all need to remember. A call to action, to be advocates, to challenge injustice, and to create a more just world for everyone.
Speaking of action, that paper you mentioned, an analysis between Trump's presidency and health-seeking behaviors of African Americans in the United States, it actually looked at how the political climate during Trump's time impacted Black Americans' healthcare choices.
Yes, fascinating study. It found that Google searches for Black doctor near me significantly increased during his presidency, especially in cities where he held rallies.
So the political climate was directly influencing healthcare decisions.
It seems so. The researchers suggest it was due to this heightened sense of fear and mistrust, leading some to seek out providers who shared their racial identity.
Trying to create safety and control in a system that felt hostile.
Exactly. And the study also found that in Louisiana, a state with high Trump approval, Black individuals were way less likely to have a personal doctor compared to white individuals.
Interesting.
But in D.C., a city with lower Trump approval, Black individuals were more likely to have a personal doctor than white individuals.
Wow, so political leanings could actually predict healthcare access for Black residents.
It highlights how intertwined politics and healthcare are, especially when it comes to race and equity.
Our political choices have real-world consequences.
Absolutely. And those consequences show up in different ways. You sent in that paper, Politics is Making Us Sick, remember?
Yeah, about how political engagement can impact health.
Exactly. The stress and anxiety, especially in such a polarized environment. The study used data from surveys throughout Trump's presidency and found that many Americans reported negative health effects because of politics.
Like what kinds of effects?
Things like fatigue, lost sleep, anger, depression, even suicidal thoughts.
Whoa.
And these effects were more intense in younger people, Democrats, and those more politically engaged.
So the more into politics you are, the more likely you are to have negative health effects.
That seems to be the trend, at least according to this study.
Makes sense, though. Politics can be incredibly stressful.
Especially when the stakes feel so high.
And with the constant news cycles, social media, it's hard to escape.
It becomes this constant anxiety.
Wearing you down over time.
Exactly. And the study found that for many, these effects actually got worse after the 2020 election, regardless of who they voted for.
So even when it's over, the stress lingers.
It seems so. Which brings up a question. How do we engage in politics without hurting our well-being?
Right, like, do we need a political self-care routine or something to protect ourselves from the emotional toll?
I love that idea. It could include things like limiting news and social media, mindfulness, finding supportive communities, channeling that energy into action.
Finding a balance between staying informed and protecting our well-being.
Exactly. We can't fight for a better world if we're burned out.
It's not selfish to take care of ourselves. It's essential for being effective advocates.
It's about recognizing that our well-being is connected to the well-being of our communities and society. We can't create a better world if we're not taking care of ourselves.
So we've covered a lot, from individual choices to the big political climate. But there's one more source I want to bring in before we wrap up.
Okay, which one?
It's this paper, The Portraiture of Stockholm Syndrome, Cultural dislocation in Phyllis Wheatley's poetry collection and selected African American texts. It's a different topic, but I think it shows how oppression impacts people psychologically and how they adapt.
Stockholm Syndrome. That's when hostages develop positive feelings towards their captors, right? How does that relate to health and politics?
Well, the paper argues that Stockholm Syndrome can be seen as a result of the trauma and power dynamics in oppressive systems.
Okay.
It looks at how certain African American literary works show characters with behaviors similar to this syndrome.
So you're saying some Black Americans might adopt the values of their oppressors as a coping mechanism?
That's what the paper suggests, a way to survive when your identity is constantly under attack.
That's a heavy thought.
It is, and the paper focuses on the poetry of Phyllis Wheatley, an enslaved woman who became a famous poet. It explores how her work might show Stockholm Syndrome, giving her praise for those involved in her enslavement.
Interesting connection. Internalized oppression can manifest in unexpected ways.
Exactly, and it shows how these experiences have lasting consequences, shaping lives and cultural norms.
But you know, this analysis also connects to our conversation about self-care and activism. Queen Afua's work, emphasizing reclaiming one's body, mind, and spirit, can be seen as a counter to this internalized oppression.
It's like saying, I won't let the messages of my oppressors define me. I will embrace my own identity and power.
Exactly. Breaking free from those mental and emotional chains, reclaiming agency.
A long and challenging journey, but ultimately liberating.
Absolutely. And it needs support, community, and commitment to self-love and healing.
So much to unpack here, right? We've covered so much ground in this deep dive.
It's been a real journey exploring how these different factors all connect, you know?
Totally. From social determinants of health, to historical injustices, to the political climate, and then those glimmers of hope with self-care and community action.
It's a lot to process.
For sure, but it's also interconnected. I think the main takeaway is we can't just ignore these issues.
Right. We all have a role to play in creating a more just and healthy world.
Absolutely. And you know, one thing that really stuck with me from all this is that idea of flipping the script on political engagement.
Oh, yeah. Instead of seeing it as this negative, stressful thing, what if we saw it as a way to heal and take action?
Exactly, like channeling all that energy and passion people have about these issues into something positive.
Imagine if politics actually made us feel empowered instead of drained, you know?
That's a game changer right there.
It could be a form of self-care, a way to care for ourselves and our communities at the same time.
I love that.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, we want to leave you with a challenge.
Okay, I like a good challenge.
Think about how you can engage with politics in a way that feels empowering and healing for you.
That's a great challenge. Maybe it's supporting a candidate, volunteering, or just having those tough conversations with family and friends about these issues.
Whatever it looks like for you, remember your voice matters, your actions matter.
We can all make a difference, no matter how small.
Thanks for joining us on this journey. It's been a privilege to explore these important topics with you.
Absolutely. And to everyone listening, keep learning, keep questioning, keep striving for a better world. We'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.